Hello, welcome to another video of Code Snippet. So in this video, we are going to look into one of the basic concept inside Spring, that is Spring Interceptors. So interceptors is very important when it comes to performing cross-cutting concerns, right? For example, logging or authentication, right? Now in this video, we are going to understand what exactly is interceptor. So let's get started without wasting any time. So this is going to be a fun video. So sit back, relax and enjoy the show. So let's first jump into the agenda of this video. So here is basically the agenda. So first we are going to understand what exactly are interceptors inside Spring. After that we will see what is handler interceptor. After that we will see some kind of implementation. So we will do some kind of hands-on coding and we will see how we can implement interceptors. After that we will just see a difference between interceptors and filters in brief, right? So that is basically the agenda of this particular video. Now I already mentioned that Spring interceptors can be used for cross-cutting concerns like logging, right? But if you're following this Spring series, then you may have idea about a topic where we already discussed something like this in order to handle cross-cutting concerns, right? So if you remember, we have seen it inside AOP, right? Aspect-oriented programming. So when we looked into AOP, we actually understood how we can intercept the flow of your code, right? So from your controller to service, you can intercept and you can perform certain kind of operation, right? So that was basically AOP, right? So if you haven't seen that video, I will recommend you go ahead and check that out as a prerequisite of this particular video so that you will have some kind of clear idea of this one, right? So let's come back to interceptors, right? So in order to understand that, let's go over here in this canvas. So for example, let's say you have this client, right? You have this client and client is making certain requests to your application, right? So inside your Spring application, the request will first land inside your dispatcher servlet. Now what is this guy dispatcher servlet, right? So the job of dispatcher servlet is basically to take the request from your client and assign it to the respective controller inside your application, right? Depending on the URL, right? For example, you have many controllers inside your application. Let's say this is your application, right? Controller 1, 2, 3, right? Many controllers. Now each controller will have multiple APIs, right? And each API will have its own path, right? So depending on the path, this guy will select the appropriate controller and transfer that request to that particular controller, right? That is basically the job of this guy, right? Dispatcher servlet, right? Now let's say there are multiple requests coming to this particular controller, right? Now let's say there is a use case, right? So let me just quickly show you a use case over here. For example, let's say you have a client, right? And your client have a user ID, right? So let's say there is a field user ID that is stored inside your database, right? And this is basically your application. This is basically your database, right? Now let's say client knows this user ID in numeric format, right? So in UI, everything is in numeric format. So they will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And in the same format, it was saved inside your database, right? It was saved inside your database in the same format, right? But now let's say there is a requirement of converting that numeric format to UUID format, right? Universal identifier kind of stuff, right? For whatever reason, right? Let's say we want to change that, right? Now we have changed this inside our database, and inside database we have UUID, right? But we don't have it in numeric format. But our client will still have numeric format only, right? And let's say we have kind of a table where we have numeric to UUID mapping over here, right? So let's say you have numeric number to UUID mapping, right? So this guy might not be visible behind me. So let's say you have a table inside your database where you have numeric to UUID mapping, right? So you know what is the number. So if you say number 1, then you know what is the UUID, right? And there are 1000 tables, you migrate everyone to UUID, right? But you cannot migrate this guy to UUID because user understands only numeric values, right? Now in this case, user will keep sending numeric values to your controllers, right? But your database do not understand that now, right? Your database don't know the numeric value. Your database only knows UUID values, right? You just have kind of a table where you have mapping, right? And all the operation inside your application is working based on UUID now instead of IDs, right? Basically, you are not changing any field. User ID will be user ID, just the format will be changed, right? Whenever the request will come, let's say get user by user ID to your controller, right? Now what you need to do, you need to first get this particular UUID of that particular number. Let's say I'm passing user ID as 1. Then what I will do, I'll do this DB call. I will get that UUID, right? And by using that UUID, I will perform the operation on this database now, right? Whatever may be the operation, right? There might be 1000 operations, right? Now, let's say you have 1000 controllers. Now here in this case, what you need to do, inside each of your controller, inside each of your API, you will need to go ahead and convert your incoming request numeric format user ID to UUID before doing any processing. So if you have 5000 APIs inside your application, you will need to change 5000 APIs to do that conversion, right? So that is not feasible, right? What if there is a way to change this number to this UUID even before your request is reaching your controller? Somewhere around here, right? Somewhere around here only, what you do, you convert this numeric format to UUID by using this table, and you pass the request UUID here. Now here in this case, you don't need to change any of the controller, you don't need to change any of the API, right? How straightforward is that? Now this middleman we are talking about is nothing but the interceptor. So interceptor is basically something which will allow you to modify your incoming request even before the request is reaching to your controller. So it sits between your dispatcher servlet and your controllers, right? Application controllers. What it will do, whatever incoming requests are coming from your dispatcher servlet, it will modify it. For example, one of the use case would be converting your user ID to your UUID, right? So that is basically the example that we have seen, right? So that is something which you can do over here, isn't it? And in that case, you don't need to modify any of your controller. How easy is that, right? That is one of the use case, which is basically a custom use case, which I faced once, and that is why I'm highlighting it over here, right? It was an easy solution for me at that time to implement, isn't it? Now there are multiple uses of this. You can also do logging over here. You can also do authentication as well, right? Let's say before your request goes to controller, you want to log it, you can log it here. Before your response goes back to dispatcher servlet, also you can log it, because this guy will come in between when you return a response as well, right? So that time also you can print a log, right? So basically interceptor allow you to intercept any HTTP request even before your call reaches to controller. Even before controller, you can intercept and modify your request, right? So that is something which you can do, right? When we saw AOP comes into picture after controller, right? So after controller, when you have, let's say, service, right? So before your call reaches to service from your controller, you can add some kind of aspect. You can add a aspect in between and you can intercept the request, right? That was something which was AOP, right? Here we are talking about interceptor. This comes even before your controller, right? After dispatcher servlet only, right? So that is basically your interceptor, right? So let's go back over here. So we have seen what is interceptor, right? Now let's see what is handler interceptor. So how we can implement interceptors inside Spring application? By using handler interceptor. So handler interceptor is basically an interface which is provided by Spring in order to make use of interceptors inside your application, right? What we can do side by side, let's open our IntelliJ and let's try to implement as well, right? So that we can visualize what exactly I'm talking about over here, isn't it? So this is basically the application management system project that we have developed when we were looking into Spring Data JPA, right? Last few videos, right? So here you have a applicant controller, right? So here inside applicant controller, we have implemented ample amount of APIs basically. So here I'm not going through the details now because we have already covered it as a part of last video, right? So you can go ahead and check that video on Spring Data JPA, right? Now here what we need is, we need an interceptor, right? We need to create an interceptor class. So what we can do, let's implement a logging example, right? So we will add a logging interceptor. Even before your request reaches to your controller, we will log something, right? And after the response is being sent, we will again log something, right? So how we can do that? So let me just create a new interceptor. So what I'll do, I'll create a package first. Let's say interceptor, right? So here I have added an interceptor and here I will add a new Java class. Let me name it as a logging interceptor. I've added this class over here. What I will do over here is, so this class currently do not have anything, right? But we want to convert it to interceptor now. Now we were talking about handler interceptor, right? What is handler interceptor? Handler interceptor is an interface, right? So this particular class over here needs to implement that interface. So what I'll do, implements handler interceptor. So if you see over here, we have a handler interceptor, right? Let me just zoom it a bit so that it's clearly visible. Now if I go inside handler interceptor, then you will see there are three methods, right? PreHandle, postHandle, and afterCompletion, right? There are three methods. Now what we can do over here, we can implement all those methods. What I will do, I'll go over here, say generate, and here I will say override methods, and there are three methods which we can override, and I will just click on OK, and this guy will override all three methods for us, right? Now here preHandle, postHandle and afterCompletion. What are these things? These overridden methods that are provided by handler interceptor. What exactly are those, right? So let's check it out, right? So let's go back over here to Canvas. And if I open this particular example over here, I hope that is visible. So if you see over here, then again a same example, just I have expanded our handler interceptor over here, right? So here, let's say we have dispatcher servlet, here we have our controllers, right? So here in this case, our controller will be, which controller we are talking about? Applicant controller, right? So here our controller will be applicant controller. So now let's say our request is coming to dispatcher servlet, right? So first, when your request is received by this guy, dispatcher servlet, what this guy will do, this guy will check if we have any interceptor, right? If we have any interceptor, we have handler interceptor, it will find our interceptor. What it will do, it will transfer the request to preHandle. PreHandle means before your request is reaching to your controller, this function will be executed. So this preHandle we are talking about over here is basically this function, preHandle, right? Basically, this will come into picture even before your controller, any of your controller, right? Be it any controller which you configure, right? How to configure that we will see in a moment, right? So that is basically preHandle. So let's say your request is reached to this guy processes it, right? Everything is well and good, right? So after that, this guy will return a response, right? So that response will be handled first by postHandle, right? So you can modify the response as well in this case, right? So we have seen this example, right? Where we wanted to convert numeric to UUID, right? In the response also, we can convert UUID back to numeric so that it is understandable by your client, right? So vice versa is again a possible over here, right? So that is basically something which we can handle inside postHandle, right? And after that, we have after completion. So your request will first go to your client, and after that, after completion will be triggered, and this guy will clean up any resources if you have any resources to clean up, right? For example, garbage collection and stuff like that will happen over here, right? It is kind of a finally method that we have in try catch chain, right? So that is basically after completion that we have over here, right? So that is basically our third method over here, right? So here, if you see, we have overridden this, and this is just calling the super method. So if you go inside it, it will just call the method of this guy, right? So before calling this guy, what we will do, we will just add some kind of loggers over here. So what I will do, I can just remove this and just return true from here, because the other guy was returning true itself, right? And before that, what I will do, I'll just add a simple print statement saying that preHandle request URI is, so we are just printing a request, right? So we are just logging a request, let's say over here, right? And I will return true, right? And in the postHandle also, we will add a simple print statement basically. So what I will do, I'll just add a simple print statement over here as well. And what we will do, we will just log that postHandle, that is this guy's postHandle, executed handler for our request URI. Again, we will print the request URI over here, isn't it? And here we don't need to return anything. We will just, because the return type of this guy is void, isn't it? And after that, in after completion also, let's print something. So I will just print that after completion request completed, right? So that is basically something that we will print, right? And if you carefully observe over here, we will get request, HttpServletRequest over here. So this request will have everything that your incoming request will have, right? All the parameters, everything will be present inside this particular request, right? And we can intercept it, right? We can modify it over here before returning true from here. We can modify that request, right? Once we do that, the modified data will be transferred to your controller, right? That is basically your preHandle, and you will have response as well. So here response you can modify back, right? You can modify before sending back to your client like that. So that is basically the purpose of your postHandle, right? And after completion is basically nothing but your some cleanup activities, right? So I'm just printing something over here, right? So here we have created our logging interceptor, right? So apart from that, what we need is we need a config. For example, we have this app config over here, or what I will do, I'll create another config, let's say new Java class, and in the, let's call it as web config, isn't it? And web config class, I will just mark it as @configuration class. This is our configuration class. This is basically the configuration that we need for our Spring Interceptor, right? So what we need over here is we need to implement MVC configurer, right? Web MVC configurer. Now, what is this web MVC configurer? This web MVC configurer will help us to register our interceptor, right? We need to register our interceptor. For example, if you see over here, we have this add interceptor method over here, right? This add interceptor method will help us to add or register our interceptor so that it will be invoked whenever our request is reaching to your application, right? This add interceptor method will help us, right? So we need to override that method, right? So what I will do, I'll say generate and override methods, and here I will select add interceptors and I'll say okay, right? So here we got our add interceptor method, right? Now here we have registry. So here in this registry, we need to register our interceptor, right? So I'll say registry dot add interceptor, right? And what I'll do, I'll just create our new interceptor, logging interceptor, right? So logging interceptor I'll create over here. And what we need to do over here now, we need to add patterns, URL patterns, right? Add path patterns which we want to include inside this particular interceptor, right? So what I will do, add path patterns, right? And here I will just add a pattern. So let me go back to our controller. Where is our controller? So here if you see, our APIs will start with /API. So what I'll do, I'll copy this. I will just copy this, and what I'll do, I'll just add it over here, and I will say **, right? That means it is basically matcher, right? So it is basically regular expression for matcher, right? So whatever is coming after **, it will match everything. That means all the paths starting with API will be intercepted, right? And we can exclude few patterns as well. So let's say I want to exclude few patterns, right? For example, let's say we have some authentication, right? So what I will do, I will just add API/auth. That means auth guy I want to exclude, right? Because authentication API will be free, right? It will not be intercepted or modified in any way, right? Or let's say I don't want logging for that. So what I will do, I will exclude that pattern. So any API which contains auth, or let it contain anything after auth, right? Let it contain anything after auth should be excluded from this interceptor. It should not be intercepted, right? So what I will do, I'll just close this, and that's it. This particular statement will register our logging interceptor inside interceptor registry, right? So we have added our interceptor basically. So that is how you can add your configuration. Very, very basic, simple stuff, right? Now that is basically our configuration, and that is how you can add your interceptor or register your interceptor, right? Now that is how you can implement your handler interceptor and register your interceptor, right? Now what we can do over here, let me just start this application first, right? So what I will do, we'll start this application. Let it start first. I see it is started. So what I will do, I'll bring up my Postman. Let me just bring it up over here. There we go. So here is our Postman, and let's just add few details, right? So let me just go back to our applicant controller, and let's add few applicants, right? So let me see if we have that already. We should have that since we have used it in last video. So there we go, we have it ready made, right? Mangalam Shrinu is sitting there for us, right? What we will do over here, we will just send this request, right? So once we send this request, our Mangalam Shrinu will be added inside database. And let's go back over here and let's observe the logs, right? I hope you can see it. Now do you see this preHandle, right? We have a preHandle added. What I will do, right? What I will just add some print statement over here. That means, let's say our request is reached to controller, right? Request is reached to controller, let's say, and let me rerun this application. It is started again. So let me just hit it again, hit our API again. So if you go back over here, now if you see, here reached controller is printed, right? This particular statement. Before that, do you see that there is a preHandle printed over here, which is coming from our handler interceptor, right? Our logging interceptor basically, right? So this particular statement basically. So basically this function over here is being called even before our controller, right? And after that your reached controller is being called. After that, this is basically related to Hibernate. It will hit all the queries, right? As we have seen in the last video. After that, you see that there is a postHandle function, which means this guy over here, this statement is being printed. After that, we have afterCompletion, which is this guy over here. So our interceptor is working smooth like a butter, right? So everything is fine over here. So what I will do, I will add a debug point over here, and I will run this application in a debug mode. Let's see what happens, right? So let's debug it now. So let it be started. So it is started. What I will do, I will hit this particular API again, and so our request is over here. So it is waiting for us to evaluate this, right? So let me just expand it over here. Now if you see over here, first our request came to preHandle, right? What I will do, I'll go to controller and I will add debug point over here as well. And here, if you observe the request, let me just open this request over here. So I hope you can see this. So here you can see all the details related to your request, right? Here everything related to your request will be present over here, right? So that is basically your request object, right? Now once we proceed and this guy returns true, then if you see over here, then your request is reaching to your controller. Now the request reached to your controller, isn't it? Now let me go back over here, add a debug point over here inside your postHandle. And now if we proceed, then if you see, this is going to service now. After service, this is going to repository. And after that, it is going back to your postHandle. After completion of your controller, it is going back to postHandle. And after that, it is going to after completion. And once the call is completed, your API call is basically completed over here, isn't it? So that is how you can see how your request is flowing through your preHandle, postHandle, after completion, blah, blah, right? Now let me just hit some get API over here. For example, let's say get by name is there, right? So what I will do, I will send this, right? If I send this, then you will see that we are in preHandle again. Now here what I will do, I will just evaluate expression over here. Here what I will do, I'll say request dot get query string, right? So query string, what I will do, so once I do get query string, then you will be able to see that there is this particular query string that we have passed from here, right? So we are getting this query string over here, and what we can do, guess what we can do, we can modify this as we want, right? So as we have seen, ID to UUID, right? So that conversion can be done over here like this, right? And this guy will have access to all your Spring beans, right? So this is not bean at the moment, but we can easily convert this to Spring bean, right? Let's see how. What we can do over here, let me just convert it to component, right? What I will do, I have converted to component, and what I will do, I will go to our web config. Here what we will do, we will inject that. So what I will do, logging interceptor, and here what I will do, I will say auto wired, right? So here I'm injecting it now, right? And here instead of passing it new, what I will do, I will just pass logging interceptor over here. So this guy from Spring application context will be registered over here, right? Now if I run this application, it should behave in the same way. Now if I pass this, and if we check this particular logs, then we have same preHandle, postHandle, and after completion printed over here, right? That means this way also is working. Now this guy is basically a Spring bean, and Spring bean can talk to other Spring bean, right? We'll have access to other Spring bean. So it can directly modify the objects or inject other beans over here, right? Inject beans over here and do database operations from here itself. For example, getting your ID to UUID mapping from your DB, right? That is something you can do over here, and you can modify your numeric ID to UUID from here itself. So that is basically interceptor, and that is how you can convert it to Spring bean, right? Let's go back over here now. And let's see what we have over here. So we have seen handler interceptor, we have seen the implementation, right? Now let's quickly discuss what are interceptor versus filter, right? Now many people will have doubt that, okay dude, filter will do same stuff, right? It is also used to modify your request. Interceptor is also used to modify the request. What is the difference between these two, right? So let me just quickly highlight it in a brief, right? This part over here is basically falls under your Spring application. Everything is basically inside your Spring application, right? But when we talk about filters, filter is not part of your Spring application. Rather, it will be a part of your servlet API. It will be outside your Spring MVC application, right? It is a part of servlet API, and it will modify the request even before reaching to your Spring application, right? And this guy will not have access to your Spring application, rather your beans inside your application, right? On the other hand, handler interceptor is basically part of your Spring application, right? It is a component. It can be a component inside your Spring application, as we have seen, isn't it? So this guy can access Spring beans inside your application directly. It can inject it as well, right? That is something which servlet API cannot do. Filters will operate on entire life cycle of your HTTP request, right? But on the other hand, interceptors work specially within Spring MVC flow, right? So inside your Spring MVC application, your request is inside your Spring MVC application. It can modify, it can access your bean, it can do stuff whatever you want, right? Logging, authentication, right? Or request modification, or even it can inject the beans and play with your database, right? So that is basically the difference between your filter and interceptors, right? So that is basically a brief difference between interceptor and filter, right? So all these I have already covered as a part of my Instagram reels. If you follow me on Instagram, you might be already aware of it because I have covered it multiple times over there, right? I usually cover this small concept over there. So if you are not following me, you just go ahead and follow Code Snippet on Instagram. You will find the link in description, right? So that is basically everything about Spring Interceptors, right? So I hope you have clear understanding of what exactly are Spring Interceptors, right? How we can implement it and how it is different from filters inside your Servlet API, right? So if you like the video, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to Code Snippet. Share this video with your friends so that they are also aware about Spring Interceptors. That's it for this video. See you in the next video.